So, the next day, Kal Mahadev was even more distracted at work. He couldn't wait to get back to his room, to that fragrance, to that feeling of ecstasy. But when he got back, he found that the perfume had almost disappeared. It was all but gone. It drove him crazy. There was just enough of the fragrance there to remind him of what he had experienced yesterday, and yet not enough to give him the same feeling again. Kal Mahadev went mad. He was like a deranged addict. He fell upon that stalagmite, trying to sniff at it harder so that he could get the smell some more. He shut all the doors and windows so that no outside air could come in and dilute that little bit of fragrance that was still left. He called for a woman. He knew what kind of ecstasy he had felt yesterday. He was determined to recreate it. I know that many of you don't really believe in killer goddesses and divine curses and so on, but they do say that the goddess tortures them and drives them insane before killing them. Kal Mahadev spent a desperate night, a desperate and miserable night in the arms of the hired woman, all the while violently scratching away at his itching ankle with almost anything that he could find. The next day, he was dreading the next day. If he had known what the next day would be like, he would probably have found a way to kill himself rather than go through that hell. Or maybe he would have stayed away from the room. But he had not known, and he could not stay away. The next day, the perfume had disappeared altogether. But just as the presence of the perfume had brought feelings of ecstatic happiness, the absence of the perfume brought a terrible, terrible, soul-destroying self-hatred. It made him want to kill himself. Kal Mahadev had no idea how to deal with this, so he did the only thing he could do. He called for more women, lots more women. And as he lay there, amongst these women, laughing, crying, hating himself, trapped in that dark, miserable world that the stalagmite had created, trying to figure out why nothing was working, the itch, in the meantime, had managed to travel up to his brain and started to eat it from the inside out. Over the next few days, Kal Mahadev did not leave his room. His days were demented, his nights were absolutely frenzied. The itch on his ankle was driving him to the brink of madness, and that little stalagmite was pushing him just over the edge. The stalagmite by now had stopped giving off any perfume at all. Instead, it had started to absorb all the smells around it. Gradually, Kal Mahadev found that every smell in the room was being replaced by a sort of damp nothingness. He spent his hours desperately trying to fill his lungs with air that smelled of something, anything. Even the women smelled of nothing anymore. Not even the ones who were now lying in their blood on the floor. Even death had lost its smell. Kal Mahadev felt like he was trapped in a coffin of damp odorlessness. They say that exactly 14 days from the full moon night when it had all started, Kal Mahadev went completely mad. The brand new moon had sat quietly in the lap of the dark, dark night, looking like the thin, almost invisible blade of the assassin's knife when Baba Kal Mahadev returned to the cave. This time there were no adoring crowds, no stories of heroism and battles, no garlands, no flowers, just Kal Mahadev, all alone, almost unrecognizable now in his madness as he headed towards his death. No one quite knows what happened at the cave that night. To this day, the local people tell stories about it, of the shrieks and the screams that had rung out through the hills, of the goddess's thundering anger, which had been loud enough to shatter galaxies, but had not managed to drown out the terror in those shrieks. No one has been into the cave since then. But they say that if you stand close enough to the giant boulder at the entrance, sometimes you can smell the inside of the cave. It smells of damp nothingness.